The stage is set, the leaders are here, the meetings have begun. The G7 summit is officially underway here in Italy. This is the 50th G7 summit. It is happening in southern Italy. The leaders are staying in a secluded oasis, a luxury resort called Borgo Egnazia. It is located in Apulia and it's really far from everything. So who's going to be there? The G7 is a group of 7 nations that were once the biggest economies in the world. That's the United States, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, Canada and the UK. They make up the G7. So you could say it's a club of rich countries. Their leaders are all here. Then there are the other guests. This list is at the discretion of the host country. They can invite whoever they want to. Usually it's just a handful of readers, but this year, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy has gone all out. She's invited leaders from more than 11 countries, including Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He will address the G7 outreach session tomorrow. The Prime Minister says that he remains committed to consolidate the India-Italy strategic partnership. The other invitees include Ukrainian President Zelensky, Brazilian President Lula da Silva, Jordan's King Abdullah II, Argentinian President Javier Milei, Saudi Crown Prince MBS and Pope Francis. It's the first time that a Pope will attend a G7 summit, so the guest list is quite long and diverse. And that means that there's a lot on the agenda. The discussions start with Africa. It's a top focus at the summit, for the host country especially. Several African leaders will be present here, and it's the perfect opportunity for Giorgia Meloni to engage with them. Africa is critical for Italy as it tries to control illegal immigration. Prime Minister Meloni has been working closely with African leaders on this. She's been traveling frequently to the continent. In the month of March, Meloni visited Egypt. In April, she was in Tunisia, and now in June, she's hosting African leaders and pushing for what's called the Mattei Plan. Here's what it's about. Meloni wants to position Italy as an energy hub between Europe and Africa. She wants to invest in the continent, boost growth in Africa, which may in turn help curb immigration. It's an ambitious plan, but Meloni is hoping that she can get the backing of the G7 for it. Second on the agenda is the Gaza war. Israel's war will dominate most conversations here, but the G7 may not do very much about it. So expect words, not action. They've already backed the US drafted peace plan, and that's all that they want to do for now. The other war will get precedence here, and that is the war in Ukraine. The summit has 2 sessions dedicated to this war. President Zelensky has been pushing for more Western aid. But I don't think he'll have to really ask here, because it seems that the G7 has already agreed to lend Ukraine $50 billion. This money will come from Russian assets. As we've been telling you, the Russian central bank has assets both in Russia and outside. It has money held in banks and financial institutions outside Russia. Now, when the war with Ukraine broke out, the West froze those Russian assets. They were immobilized. Moscow could no longer access them. But the point is that this money still belongs to Russia. The West cannot touch it. What they can do is use the profits generated by these assets. And they want to use this money to aid Ukraine. There will also be discussions on migration, economic security, and even artificial intelligence. A final statement will come on Saturday, but it won't be binding. It's more like a guide, an indication of how the group thinks. But does it even matter? Is the G7 still significant? You see, the group of 7 was founded in 1975. Back then, it was a group of the world's 7 biggest economies. They made up for 70% of the world's GDP. So it was the group with the deepest pockets. Russia joined it in 1998 and it became the G8. But that was short-lived because Moscow was thrown out in 2014 after the invasion of Crimea. So they were back to G7 in 2014. Now for long it was like the cool table in the school cafeteria. It's where everyone wanted to sit. But things have changed in the last decade. The significance of the G7 has waned. Right now, it makes up for 40% of the global GDP and only 10% of the global population, which is not very good representation. Plus, they have competition from other groups like the BRICS and G20. Both of them represent more countries and bigger economies. So is the G7 still the big economic club that it claims to be? Or is it just a relic of the past? It's something for the group to think about as they meet over the next 2 days. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As the G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost.